The following is a recording of a live questions and answers session with Chris McCann that took place on Friday, July 15th, 2016.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a pre-recorded eBible Fellowship's Questions and Answers time. This program is designed to interact with you with your questions and comments related to the Bible, and we'll try to respond as well as possible by going to the Bible. And so, with our Bibles at the ready, it's now time to turn things over to our speaker for this pre-recorded questions and answers time, and say hello to Chris McCann.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to eBible Fellowship's Friday night question and answer program. Tonight, we're going to take a look at the Bible with any questions or comments that anyone may have, and each person is invited to share whatever on your mind by contacting us in one of the ways were just mentioned, and we'll be glad to take your call. I'll try to respond as much as possible by going to the Bible, as the Bible is God's holy word. It is our source for divine truth, for absolute truth. It is the only source for truth in the world, and so we're greatly blessed and privileged to be able to turn to the Bible at any time in order to search out a thing. And by God's grace, it's often the case in these days at the end of the world that God graciously opens up the information that we're seeking and reveals it to us. He grants us understanding. It's all a part, all working of His mercy. Yes, God bestows mercy upon us when He saves us, but it doesn't stop there. He continues to be merciful to us throughout our days as He is revealing the hidden things of the Bible to us. And our desire is to know, to understand the Bible. And in order to do that, we must dig into it and search out things. Well, we have only a short time together, so we're going to start right away by going to the first person on the phone tonight. Welcome to our Friday night question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Good evening, Brother Chris McCann. I have an observation. I cannot help but marvel at what a vivid and striking picture is painted concerning God's election program in the gathering of the animals that were to go into Noah's ark. As you pointed out, it was not Noah or his family who selected the animals. Neither did the animals come to the base of the ark of their own accord, but it was God who drew them there at the appointed time, and they all went into the ark. But what is even more striking is that mankind, in his arrogance and presumption, sums his nose at God's election program, thinking that he can make a decision for Christ, or that he can exercise his positive volition and accept Christ at any time he feels. Can you speak a little bit more on this, Brother Chris? But before you do that, I must say that these Genesis studies are truly a great tightening and reinforcement of our understanding of the many doctrines of the Bible. And this is borne out in this week's study, where we learned that Noah and his family were not idle while on the ark for those 370 days. Rather, they were occupied with the task of feeding the animals. And this brings into sharp focus our responsibility to feed the sheep during these days of prolonged judgment on the world. And this is a doctrine which I myself, in the past, have had some deep reservations. The studies are truly a blessing, to which assuredly many agree. So may the Lord continue to prosper your search for truth, as well as the efforts of the eBible Fellowship as a whole. Thank you, and God bless.
Well, yes, thank you for sharing your comments. And I'm finding the same thing. And I think we're going to continue to see, especially as we get into Genesis chapter 7, that the information that God has revealed concerning of May 21, 2011, 7,000 years after the flood, is further reinforced. And when we get into Genesis 7, we'll look further into the idea of the animals too, because God makes another statement concerning them, but that'll lead us in a slightly different way. But as you mentioned, in both the declaration from God long before the ark was built, he told Noah exactly who would go on to the ark, the people that would go on to the ark, and that prefigured God's election program. But so too with the animals, that it was only a remnant of the whole of the animal kingdom that were brought to that particular area and to Noah and were able to board the ark. And a good number of animals did board the ark, but out of the whole world, it was very few. So we see that they do typify God's remnant, the elect. And yeah, the free will doctrine is without any question. There's a question about it. There's still disputes about it in the churches, and they go back and forth, or amongst professed Christians. But insofar as God's people, the true people of God, the elect, are concerned, there is no question at all about the nature of God's salvation program. The Lord, during the Great Tribulation period, brought forth and opened up information regarding the faith of Christ. That was actually one of the early doctrines that was revealed in the first few years of the Great Tribulation that had never been emphasized before in the church age for almost 2,000 years. There was always a sort of mystery that surrounded the whole discussion of God's grace and salvation and exactly how it happened. And you would find even the Reformed theologians, the Reformed churches, who would say God saved by election. They would use the word election. They would go to the verses that we could go to, and they would say God saves by election. Yet they would allow that the gospel goes forth, and then for those people that believe it and are called and believe it and are drawn to it, that they were elected. So they really muddied that pure water of God's salvation program by inserting that there was an aspect of free will in man's response, but then once he responded, we would say, well, it's all a matter of election. And it was adding, again, a little work to God's grace. And that is what was clarified. That little bit of deception and that little twist at the end of that wonderful doctrine of election that the Reformed churches and the Reformed theologians had been performing for hundreds of years. And anyone can look up Spurgeon and these theologians of the past and preachers of the past, well-known men, highly respected, and they would mention election, and in the same message, they would also encourage people to believe. But God was not going to permit that during the latter rain period, and so he needed to clarify, because if you recall, Mr. Camping did a study on the Sabbath rest and the time of tribulation, or the church's time of desolation, would be a time of Sabbath rest. And that is that God would not permit works. He would not permit works to enter into the discussion anymore, as far as the sending forth of the gospel into the world in order that the great multitude be saved. That doctrine was going to be left behind with the churches. And so Mr. Camping began to teach on Galatians 2:16. And let me read that. Galatians chapter 2, verse 16. It says, knowing that a man is not justified by the works of the law, but by the faith of Jesus Christ. And we also learn from a couple of scriptures that God says faith is a work. So the sinner cannot in any way exercise belief or faith and accept Christ, because that's a work. And no man is justified by the works of the law. And if you do the least work of trying to keep the law, then you've placed yourself under the whole law, and you're obligated to keep the whole Bible and all of its commandments. And so that was the clarification that God brought forth. Oh, it's not our faith, but it's Christ's faith that saves. And that once again turned the 99% grace and election doctrine that the most reformed of churches were teaching into the pure 100% grace and faith of Christ doctrine that God's elect proclaim throughout the about 17-year period of the latter rain. And of course, it all comes back to the sovereign nature of God when it concerns his salvation program. God is sovereign. He's sovereign in everything, but especially regarding his salvation program, he's sovereign regarding whom he saves, how he saves, when he saves, and where he saves. Every aspect of God's salvation program, God is Lord. He is the sovereign Lord, and it all is, salvation is of the Lord. It is not of man in any way. And every time sovereign God makes a decree, which is his sovereign right to do so, concerning some aspect of his salvation program, you have rebel man who wants to dispute, who wants to argue and talk back and say, not so, Lord. And yet, no, the Bible is clear. Salvation is 100% of the Lord. It is by his grace, his faith, his righteousness that we're saved. But thank you for calling and sharing. And let's go to the next person on the phone. Welcome to our question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
I called a couple of Sundays ago about 1 Kings 6:38 that says the house was finished in the 11th year, which is no doubt talking about the spiritual house of the elect being completed on May 21, 2011. But it also says the house was finished in the 8-month bull. So what is the spiritual significance of the 8th month, which I know in the biblical calendar would be November?
Yeah, it's interesting. Let me read the verse you're referring to. It says in 1 Kings 6, verse 37, in the 4th year was the foundation of the house of Jehovah laid in the month Ziph, and Ziph is the 2nd month. And in the 11th year, in the month Bul, which is the 8th month, was the house finished. throughout all the parts thereof, and according to all the fashion of it, so was he 7 years in building it. So in Solomon's 4th year, which was 967 BC, and that was the year that David died, and David had stored up all the material, or great amount of material for the temple, that then Solomon began to build. And it was, I think, the 480th year from the coming out of Egypt. And that's interesting, because from 967 to the birth of Christ in 7 BC, it's 2 times 480. So from the coming out of Egypt, 480 years, the laying of the foundation, and then if you double that same number of years, you have the birth of Christ, which we can see how he also relates to the foundation of the temple. But the building of the temple, based on these statements, took 7 years and 6 months for it to be completed throughout all the parts thereof. Now, later on in 1 Kings and also in 2 Chronicles, we read the temple was completed and the Spirit of God entered in, and it was during the Feast of Tabernacles, which was the 7th Hebrew month. And yet this tells us it's the 8th month. And I think the only way we can understand this is that basically they finished all the major work. They finished all of the temple in a real way, and they wanted to dedicate the temple and to celebrate the temple's completion, along with the feast of the 7th month, the Feast of Tabernacles and Ingathering. And God had his reasons for wanting that to line up in the way that he did. As we know, that the Feast of Tabernacles does relate to the and the Feast of Ingathering to the final bringing in of the elect at the time of the end. And the bringing in of the elect is the building of the spiritual temple. And so in the 7th month, all the way to the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, which was the 23rd day of the 7th month, they observed the dedication and that feast. But a couple of weeks later, or well, not even that, 1 week later or so, you have the 8th month bull. And apparently there was a little touch-up work or a few items that had still to be done before they had completed all things necessary for the temple. Now, I don't know the spiritual reason for that, or why God would emphasize the month bull, the 8th month, in this way, and that's something we can keep in prayer and think about. But historically, it's probably that kind of a reason. It's sort of like when you paint a project, your living room and dining room, and you've painted it all. It's done, but you kind of let the paint dry, and then you walk around and you see, oh, I need to touch up here and touch up there. I think that's why it wasn't finished until the 8th month. But thank you for calling and sharing, and let's go to the next person on the phone. Welcome to our Friday night question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
My question is concerning the verse that says, Jesus says, follow me, and the man says, first let me go bury my dead father. And then Jesus says, let the dead bury their own dead. I don't have the verse number, but my question is about the dead father. Does he represent Satan and his kingdom, and saying, let them go bury each other? What I want to know is what you think that means spiritually.
Okay, let me just see if I can find the verse. In Matthew chapter 8. Matthew 8 and verse 21. It says, "And another of his disciples said unto him, Lord, suffer me first to go and bury my father. But Jesus said unto him, Follow me, and let the dead bury their dead." Well, this, it of course has spiritual meaning. And in the Bible, there's several times, several references where God will speak of living people as being dead. For instance, in 1 Peter 3, it says in, does it say they're dead there? No, it just says their spirits in prison. There is a few occasions like that. I can't find it right now. But God will address the living as though they're dead, and it has to do with their spiritual condition, because they're dead in trespasses and sins. And so Christ really is using this occasion of the man and his dead father to make a spiritual point. Jesus said unto him, when he wants to go and bury his father, Follow me, and let the dead bury their dead. And of course, that's an impossibility if you're looking at this literally, and with both the dead father and the other dead. The dead cannot bury the dead. They have no ability to move or to think or to do anything anymore. So physically, it's an impossibility for the physically dead to bury the physically dead. And since we know that the man's father is dead physically, when Jesus says, let the dead bury their dead, then the dead who do the burying are spiritually dead. It's a reference to their spiritual condition. They're dead in their soul because of their offenses against the law of God. And so he's just emphasizing the point. Now, I don't know the spiritual meaning for this. Of course, there's nothing wrong for a true believer to bury someone who has died in their family, a close relative. We do that. God's people have done that all throughout time. Just look at Abraham and his purchase of the burial site where he buried Sarah. Well, Sarah was also a true believer, but there's nothing wrong with burying people. And for this individual to make this statement, it could be that Christ is just emphasizing the greater importance, or the most important thing is to follow him. And it does happen, and it's man's tendency to try and make excuses, to justify not following the Lord, not taking up our cross, not living the life of a Christian and doing the will of God. Well, you see, now at this time, my father just died, and I have to take care of the arrangements, and I have to, now maybe he has 5 brothers, and maybe he's the middle brother. Maybe it's not his responsibility or obligation, and he could let them handle it. It's just an excuse. And there's another place where there are men, I think it's in a parable, when the king calls for a feast, and each one gives a different excuse. Well, I got to do this. I just married a wife. I got to do the other thing. The natural man has all kinds of excuses why today I can't do things God's way. I'll do it tomorrow, Lord. And then when tomorrow comes, there's something else that comes up. So Christ is properly placing the number one emphasis for a child of God. It usurps everything else. This is top priority, is what we can gather from this statement concerning the Lord's command to each follower. He has to be first. Seek ye first the kingdom of God, and all these things shall be added unto you. And remember, in Matthew 6, there was anxiety and worry and concerning food and drink and clothing and all the other things of life. Well, God focuses us in the correct way. Seek ye first the kingdom of God. Follow me. And the dead will bury their dead. That would be taken care of, God is telling him. Even historically, the situation with his father's death would be settled. You don't have to concern yourself with that. Just follow me. And that's, of course, good advice from God, good counsel from the Bible for each one of us. But thank you for calling and sharing. And let's go to the next person on the phone. Welcome to our Friday night question and answer program. Please go ahead with your call.
Mr. McCann, I have a question on John 6, verse 19 and verse 21. And I know you've told me that you have not studied this one, but my question has to do with whether I have permission to spiritually understand it in a manner that you practiced, I believe, in Revelation 11. But I don't know. I never studied under Mr. Camping, so this spiritual study, I don't trust myself.
Well, go ahead. Go ahead. What?
When in
well,
John
let me read
6:19,
the verses first. John 6,
verse 19.
verse 18. I'll start there. And the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. So when they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs, they see Jesus walking on the sea and drawing nigh unto the ship, and they were afraid. But he saith unto them, It is I, be not afraid. Then they willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was at the land whither they went.
My question is to verse 19. In the other two accounts, this spot is referred to as the middle of the Sea of Tiberias or the Sea of Galilee, and so it has a set point that it's in the midst. So when he uses the number 25 or 30, and those are two different numbers, then is that somewhat like 3.5 days or 42 or 1,260? I can say 5 times 5 is 25. So he's defining that point as salvation is established, and then the 30 is the purpose of God. 3 times 10, the purpose of God is complete. Do I have a spiritual permission to do that, or you can't do that?
Well, the one thing we can know when God gives two numbers like this, for 3 transgressions of Moab, or for 4, which he does in Amos, or the 7 things, and then it might be 8 things, or there's 2 numbers given in Proverbs several times. That when God does that, it permits him, or it enables him to give us 2 numbers now that have spiritual meaning. For instance, 25, as you mentioned, is 5 times 5, and 5 is the number for atonement. And 5 times 5 really strongly emphasizes atonement. But it's not just 25. When they rode about 5 and 20 or 30 furlongs, then we have the number 30, which is 6 times 5, or 2 times 3 times 5. And depending on the focus or what's in view here, 6 in the Bible has to do with work, or if it's broken down, 2 would be caretakers and 3 purpose. So that's what I mean. We'd have to see the context. Is the Lord emphasizing work of some kind, or does it have to do with the caretakers of the Bible and purpose in some way, along with the atonement, the number 5? And so that's one thing we can be sure of concerning these two numbers. Each one has its own spiritual meaning. And by saying, of course, God knew precisely how far they had rode, but in making this kind of statement, saying it this way, again, it permits him to present two numbers that each one has a different focus and adds something to the account. But thank you for calling and sharing. And I would like to thank everyone for joining with us tonight. Please remember, this coming Sunday at 1:30, we'll have another online question and answer program during our fellowship time. And the following week, July 24th, Lord willing, we hope to have a day in the Word at the Northeast Philadelphia Veterans Hall that we're renting, and all are welcome. It looks like that day in the Word will be from 8:30 in the morning until 2 or 2:30. Something that's a little longer than the last one we had. I think the last time we had to be out by 1, but we have a little bit more time. So all are welcome. If anyone needs information, directions, or anything like that, you can write a note to eBibleFellowship@juno.com, and we'll send you a link with directions to the hall and also the times that it'll start. But for now, I'll say good night, and may the Lord's perfect will be done.
And thank you for joining us again for eBible Fellowship's Questions and Answers time with your speaker, Chris McCann. You can join us for these questions and answers sessions Sunday afternoons following the Sunday studies and certain weeknights following the Monday through Friday studies. Check eBibleFellowship.com for the current schedule. Until next time, may the Lord's perfect will be done.